Hi, thanks for joining us. My name's Kevin Birkby. This is Milea Cosby, and we're both client solutions engineers for Pinnacle Advanced Reliability Technologies. Our day-to-day job has us spending a lot of time with inspection supervisors, chief inspectors, and reliability engineers in all different kinds of industries. I'd say mainly oil and gas, but we spend a lot of time with petrochemical, chemical, specialty chemical.
Mining, agriculture.
Yeah, fertilizer guys, pharmaceutical guys, et cetera. And because of our unique experiences talking to these guys, it gives us some perspective on where we've seen the industry in the past, what we see going on today, and what some potential evolutions are and where we see the future possibly going. We thought we'd spend some time sharing some of that insight with you guys and give you a key look into, how we see people using technology, some of the information that's available, programs.
Some of the challenges that we've seen people have.
Absolutely, and how people are dealing with them, and what we see coming in the not too distant and maybe a glimpse into the distant future. So we'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute. And
actually there will be a chance for questions at the very end.
Yes.
So if you guys have questions, make sure that you send them in.
Stick with us, and we'll make sure we get them all
Exactly.
answered today, and hopefully give some insight and education into what we see in the industry. I think it's important to look at this through the lens with a little bit of context of what's historically gone on in the inspection business. And our coworker Mark McConnell has a tendency to go back to the 50s and 60s when he describes this, and we won't take you back quite that far, but traditionally, and in the last couple decades anyway, inspection departments leaned very heavily on personnel within the facility. You oftentimes had the same inspector that worked at a facility for 15, 20, 30 plus years in the same unit inspecting the same equipment. There's a lot of inherent knowledge in these guys' heads, and there was half a dozen of them across the facility. They were old hands, and they believed in knowing as much as they could about what they were doing. And guy might be an operator and was also an inspector. Maybe he was just a longtime inspector, but he was the same guy that inspected a piece of equipment, a pressure vessel, looked after piping, even on the reliability side, same operators running pumps and turbines, whatever it might be. And he had a lot of inherent knowledge in his head, but it was accumulated knowledge over the years of, what kind of damage this equipment had seen, what kind of actions they took. You didn't have to keep a lot of repair logs because, John had all that information in his head. He knew how they repaired that thing the last time they had issues with it, and, what they did and what they adjusted to hopefully mitigate the issues they were seeing and so on.
They knew where their trouble spots were. So
Yeah.
they knew in this particular tower, I kept seeing the same problems. So they always knew where to do their inspections and where to really focus a lot of their efforts.
Yep. And through 510 and managing fixed interval inspection programs, as 1910 came along and you started to get more and more people, maintaining compliant programs. But when we say compliant, we mean compliant on an interval basis, a fixed 510 interval. Even that same guy was still the one who was managing that program and managing, doing the proper inspections in the proper amount of time. And you got the knowledge out of the inspections because he knew the history of the vessel. And I'd say one of the evolutions that happened is as these guys started to retire, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, the operators have turned to inspection contractors to come in and run these same fixed interval programs, or maybe not run the fixed interval programs, but execute the inspections in these fixed interval programs. And there was a lack or dearth of good documentation there that gave these guys the same ideas of what had happened in the past. The knowledge that was in John's head that worked there for 25 years didn't get passed through documentation and old inspection reports that maybe they said what kind of shape the vessel was in. Maybe they didn't. Maybe it was just a thumbs up, it's okay to continue. One of the things that came out in 2000 was basically, with 580 and 581, the risk-based inspection documents, was a general acknowledgement that we needed a better way to, manage inspections and a better way to inspect vessels to really get a good understanding of what's affecting them and how it's affecting the facility. And I'd say that shift was an acknowledgement that the fixed interval wasn't the most robust way to go about managing inspections and really understanding where risks lie in the facility, getting the most out of an inspection program. So,
and it's really about taking that experienced inspector's knowledge over decades of time and really putting that into a very repeatable program. So it's just taking all of those justifications and putting it into a software program, into our system, so that no matter who that inspector is, they know exactly where all those trouble spots are. So it's just providing the documentation and the justification so that it's standardized no matter who's performing the inspection, whether you have a contractor or an on-site inspector performing that work, and whether it's today or 50 years from now.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that one of the reasons we've seen the huge shift in the marketplace or in the industry, I think Inspectioneering had a poll. We've got some data from 80% of people that responded to the poll say they've got some type of a risk-based inspection effort going on in their facility. One of the reasons that you've seen that huge shift is an acknowledgement that there's got to be an evolution in the way that they do things. They've got to get, it might be because they've got aging personnel. It might be because,
they've got aging equipment.
Especially
aging equipment that's really nearing, a potential end of life at some point, because there's a lot of plants out there that have been operating 50 to 100 years. And so they have to figure out a way to better manage their assets instead of just going out and revamping an entire unit. And so one of the ways that they can do that is with risk-based inspection, better data on being confident about what kind of degradation's actually occurring within that piece of that equipment, and then just utilizing their money, utilizing their spend a lot more efficiently, so they're focusing those resources on the pieces of equipment that they need to look at. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where it leads into, as more people have, I guess, performed risk-based inspection implementations, they're now using those results to impact their decisions, and to really, now you see people making decisions about not only turnarounds, but business operations decisions based on the risk of the asset, risk of potential failures, and just they're using a lot of that information to make better business decisions.
Or we hope so anyway, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we hope so.
And I think one of the important things to note is the fixed interval programs were maybe less complicated, or viewed as less complicated. And I think still to this day, some people still maintain a fixed interval, 5-10 based program because they view it as being less complicated. But it's almost a compliance-driven mindset that gets you to inspections and gets you to performing good inspections, performing on-time inspections. The only thing that gets you to performing good inspections that are effective and really focused in a fixed interval program is someone who's chosen to go above and beyond, in their search to do good inspections, or they maybe still have some of that inherent knowledge in the facility. RBI was intended, and the reason risk-based inspection was viewed as a better way to go about defining inspection intervals and methods, the reason it was better is because it almost forced you to understand more about the damage that affects your equipment. You had to get a corrosion study done, so a corrosion engineer, a qualified corrosion engineer was having to look at your equipment and what affects it.
You have to understand the process. What's
Absolutely.
Flowing through those pieces of equipment, and understanding the contaminants. Mm-hmm. So what are my operating conditions? Do I have water? Do I have H2S concentration somewhere? So you have to understand a lot more about the process of your facility.
And I think the goal with that, all of that being, is that you have the greatest amount of understanding possible, so that not only do you understand what's affecting your equipment, you understand where your real risks are in the facility. Ideally, you maintain that same diligence that you use to implement your program and maintaining it and performing your inspections, making sure things are done on an effective basis, and you're getting A grades on your inspections when you go through, and you're being as effective as you want to be. Unfortunately, I think one of the things that we've seen, in probably the last 5 years or so, is people are coming out of RBI implementations and getting to where they're no longer putting RBI in, they're using RBI, they're running it. There's still a bit of a compliance mindset to running that RBI program. There's still maybe they put RBI in because they wanted to get longer inspection intervals. And we caution people about that on a day-to-day basis, that it might yield you some of those, but if that's the only reason you're chasing RBI, it may be a little bit misleading. But
Right.
I'd say there's still a compliance mindset in the way people are executing RBI programs. And I think one of the things we want to talk about today is how some of the more progressive people that we talk to day in and day out are really starting to see greater values out of RBI programs and out of some of the things that start to get connected to RBI programs, IOWs, CCDs. They're starting to see greater value out of those because they're truly embracing all the benefits that RBI can provide you. They're not just using it as a way to, a software that kicks out exactly what your inspection plan should be, or gives me an inspection due date that hopefully is past the other inspection due date. They're not RBIing pieces of equipment. They're really conducting analyses in an effort to understand as much as they can. So we'll spend some time talking about a few stories that we know and a few other things that we've seen that are some changes in the industry, a shift to where people are getting the value out of their programs, and they're getting good information and good data out, and they're managing it well. Not just getting the required amount of information into a system that lets them go on and get their next inspection due date, I think.
So as we see the programs shift to what are they doing today and in the future, how do you explain the value of moving to using the risk that you've generated to make better business decisions? I think we see that a lot with capital project improvements, because throughout the implementation, the risk-based inspection implementation, you'll identify what your consequence is for all of your assets. And so in the process, you might identify some key areas where maybe that consequence is actually too high. And one of the ways that you can mitigate that is maybe we need to revamp a unit, or put in a spare piece of equipment, or take on some other capital project that helps you reduce that consequence in that particular area. And so that's one example of how companies are starting to make business decisions based on risk.
And I think it's important to note that it's not just driving, in those cases, RBI is not just driving inspection decisions. It's driving, unit configuration decisions.
Exactly.
It's people tend to think of it only being in a realm of, hey, when do I inspect and how? When in reality, maybe one of the best ways you can drop the risk of a piece of equipment is to have some additional alarms in place that alert people sooner. Have redundant exchangers or something
Exactly.
in effect that maybe instead of shutting your plant down, they're just reducing. Maybe you can just slow flow down and pull something out to do some repairs on it. That's a really good point.
Or even, so what about feedstocks to your plant as well? So, okay, the business in the past makes decisions based on what type of feedstock that they use, based on what's the market today. What kind of price can I get for feedstock A versus feedstock B, and I'm going to use one or the other to make sure my margins are where they need to be. But what if you're also looking at, well, if I change feedstocks, then I have a different contaminant level. How is that impacting the overall, life cycle of those assets? So if I have a more corrosive feedstock, then maybe I'm seeing more advanced corrosion, some potential for cracking in certain areas of the plant. And is that worth it? Do I want to take on that additional risk just because I can get better margins for this particular feedstock? So
Absolutely.
I think those are some questions too.
Same line of thinking for some of the programs that have even moved into doing IOWs,
Right.
integrity operating windows. They've started to build windows around maybe it's the TAN, the total acid number, the pH of the incoming
Sulfur
crude.
content.
Sulfur content.
If we're talking about a refinery.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've started to build controls within their facility. Again, has nothing to do with their inspection department, simply because those things are driving, significantly more damage in their equipment. But they didn't have an understanding of what that risk was until they really tried to utilize RBI for the full value they could get out of it and build on it with that type of understanding. And corrosion engineers now have a tremendous amount more data and ammunition to work with in programs that have moved to RBI, because they make sure that we're getting the measurements, the testing, the inspections done on the proper things that they want. So it leads you to be able to have a better understanding of where to go spend your money within your facility outside of your inspection department. So that's a good point.
That's true. And then, so another area that we see, I guess, driving business decisions is with turnaround planning and your outages. So in the past, outages were scheduled on a pretty regular basis. So it was every 3, 4, 5 years, and they did a whole, maybe they took down 4 units at a time. Maybe they took down half of this unit, the other half of this train. And so now what we're seeing is, as you've generated all your risk results, now you're planning your inspections based on those results. And then, well, we're actually seeing a whole different skill set that is helping to plan the inspections as well as execute them. So before, you would have your unit inspectors potentially that are, and even some probably turnaround planning individuals that are helping to plan these routine inspections that you're doing. But instead of looking at it from that perspective, now we have these, databases that are calculating your risk. We have another database that's managing how you're planning your turnaround, and then we can see these merge together. And so the person who's planning your turnaround now, it's advantageous to have them have a knowledge about what risk-based inspection is, how the database works, what are the damage mechanisms that I'm looking at, what do I need to do in order to inspect for that particular damage mechanism. So a familiarity with API 571, which is the damage mechanism documentation, and even potentially about corrosion control documents and what it's going to take to really get an effective inspection looking for those particular areas. And I think we've even seen, just recently, we've seen a client who kind of took a little bit of a different approach, and they had an engineer who was a participant in developing the RBI program, so was very familiar with the plant itself, the data that was used, the results, the software that was used, and he helped plan the turnaround, and then was there on site to look at the results from the inspection group and then interpret what the inspectors were finding and just make sure that was, I guess, the report reflected the inspections that they were doing and the particular damage mechanisms and percentages that they inspected in that piece of equipment.
They almost had a built-in QC during their turnaround to make sure that all of the data points that their RBI system wanted to get out of it were being hit effectively, even to the point of having a corrosion engineer to consult with to make sure that the results they were seeing were in line, to make sure, do I need to go back out and take a second look at that or not? Much better to find that out mid-process rather than after things are buttoned up and you're left wondering later if you're grading inspections months after turnarounds, whatever that might be. So.
Right, and all those reports were written specifically for looking for damage mechanisms. So there wasn't any confusion if you're reading them. And I'm imagining, 10 years from now, if I'm reading that report, there's no confusion. It's very clear about what damage mechanism you were looking for, how much of an inspection you did looking for that damage mechanism, and the results. So did I find anything? Mm-hmm. Was there any evidence of heavy corrosion or crack? Was there any evidence of any kind of damage for that asset?
I was at a petrochemical facility the other day that has a turnaround starting in the next couple of weeks, and when these guys have been using RBI for a number of years. When you have an RBI program, what we at Pinnacle tend to tell people is it gives you the greatest opportunity to have the most knowledge you can about your facility, right? You don't necessarily have to follow exactly what it tells you to do, but you're making informed decisions. I talked to one of the inspectors out there, and I said, well, how many vessels are you going into in the turnaround? And he said, well, we're going into about 60, 70 vessels. And I said, okay, is that all RBI-driven internal inspections? He said, no, RBI is driving us inside of 17, 18 vessels, somewhere in that neighborhood. We're using the opportunity to go inside the other ones just to make sure that we're doing some validation of our efforts and what we've done in the past. But you wouldn't have that kind of understanding, typically in the old world, if you had them opened up, you went in as many of them as you possibly could, right? Until you ran out of budget, ran out of time, or ran out of resources to get it done. But these guys knew exactly where they could focus, and it was, okay, great, our budget might allow us to go inside of 60 or 70 vessels, but if it only allowed you to go into 20, you knew exactly which 20 to go into. It's more informed more informed decision-making both in the planning process, in the execution, and then they know when they go conduct those RBI inspections, exactly the methods they need to use, the personnel that need to be on hand, what kind of cleaning is required to ferret out the extent of the damage. All of that can be, gleaned from a solid program, and if you're using the program to its fullest potential, that months in advance, years in advance of what you're doing. And I'd say it's probably indicative, the people that are getting progressive with this are the ones that they're getting systematic in their approach, right? Like, so when you put in RBI in your facility, it's pretty rare that you do that without some type of a software or some type of an IDMS system, an RBI system. That's a shift in mentality sometimes for people, away from a people, paper, email, back and forth kind of thing, or a file cabinet, shop. You can tell the guys that have done RBI, things start to end up as electronic documents in places rather than file cabinets sometimes. The shift to being systematic in your approach tends to bleed outside of just that RBI bit. So these guys are putting together inspection plans, and man, it's a consistent format from one to the next. They've got access requirements because they know that that's going to be the same for that piece of equipment next time. They've got cleaning requirements, and that's in its own spot on there. It's there's no more ad hoc decision making that goes on, or they try to minimize it as much as possible.
Limited discovery work.
Exactly.
Right? So they're trying to they're trying to anticipate any of the issues that could occur.
And not just in the inspection, but also
findings.
in just how I'm going to execute it, right? So I know whether I need scaffold, but all of that stuff is built out in these inspection plans, and that's a systematic approach. Every time they have a new vessel that comes up, next turnaround comes around, they're using the same formats, they're using similar systems, just lowers the transaction cost and everything they do. And that's just the mindset from RBI. RBI doesn't give you that, but guys that really want to see the value out of it are doing that same thing. So I'd say one of the other areas that we've seen a big shift since, in recent years, and I think you're going to see an even bigger shift in coming years, is in the resource competency and background of the people who are working within the inspection departments that we see from day in and day out. We've in that same study that came out, or the same poll that came out of Inspectioneering recently, one of the heavier weights and questions that we saw in responses was in the difficulty level of finding qualified full-time personnel for these refineries not just refineries, I keep saying that, but in these facilities to operate on a day-to-day basis. Part of that, I think, is because you have an aging workforce that's working its way out of the industry, and they have to find who to replace them with. Well, you're not going to go find another guy who's worked there for 15, 20, 30 years who knows everything about it. So, and if you do, obviously those guys are fairly expensive and budgets are dwindling. But so you have to make some decisions on what type of resource are you going to pursue. And I think it's comfortable and it's traditional for inspection departments to seek out inspection personnel, right? And you have to have some inspection personnel, no doubt about it. Some qualified and certified API guys, hopefully with some experience that understand the equipment and what's going on in your facility. But should you continue to search out inspection personnel, or is there going to be a shift in mindset to some other types? In that same poll, we had roughly 50% of respondents that said they needed corrosion expertise within the program. Roughly 50% of the respondents said they needed more engineering expertise in the program, whether that be from an implementation point of view, a software expertise, automation, anything along those lines, fitness for service, things like that, especially with aging assets. We know that that's become a focus for a lot of plants. But in addition to all that, also just needing some general systems knowledge and how to maintain things and keep things efficient in the plant. Well, I think traditionally someone would have gone out and looked for an inspector that had corrosion knowledge or an inspector that had experience with this particular system. Well, now guys are starting to see a shift, and they're looking for individuals who, maybe that guy's just a systems expert or a systems guy. Maybe it's an engineer within the department that can maybe make other guys more effective in how they do it. And I would say it's even fair to say that we're seeing a poll coming from us. We have an inspection division on hand, and the phone calls changed. It's not just, hey, I need an inspector with this experience. It's, hey, well, you guys have systems guys, you guys have corrosion people, whatever it is. Can we draw on your experience? Can we use you guys to come help support our programs? Programs have different needs today as a result of RBI and result of IOW, CCDs. They have different needs than they had 10 years ago, 15 years ago, as people are moving towards this stuff. In finding full-time personnel is probably one of the biggest challenges they have.
And especially when you look at some of the smaller facilities versus some of your larger plants. So at a larger facility, it may be completely beneficial to have a full-time corrosion engineer or full-time metallurgist or just a full-time RBI engineer, inspection engineer, whatever that role is.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk about a smaller facility that maybe, 300 pieces of equipment, it's probably not feasible to have a full-time corrosion engineer at each one of those smaller facilities. It just doesn't make enough sense. And so you'll see people reaching out to other like contractors to bring in some of that expertise.
And that shift to contractors has forced some evolution in how that's done as well, right?
Exactly.
It's the mindset traditionally is I'm going to find out how much these guys are per hour, try to decide how long I can afford to pay for that guy, and then go tell somebody I need a guy for that long. And one of the big shifts is in finding ways to, maybe I need a corrosion guy and a systems guy and an engineering guy and an inspection guy. Well, I can't afford to have all those guys here at the same time. Well, maybe there's alternative ways of working those guys in and out, using them on demand, finding a way to build a project of some sort so that it's well understood going into it what kind of resources you need, how long you need them for, and so on. And we'll talk a little bit later about some evolutions we've seen in how to go about making that more affordable. But at a minimum, find a single source contractor, or trying to find a single source contractor that can provide you all of those things has been one of the bigger shifts we've seen. People, if you have an inspection contractor, you've got an engineering contractor that maybe is doing failure analysis, fitness for service, just helping you with validation or revalidation efforts. You got
turnaround contractors.
Yeah, that's a huge one, right?
That's another one.
And then in addition to that, you've got software implementation personnel, whatever it might be. Well, if you've got all those guys working in your facility at one time, I feel bad for the chief inspector, inspection supervisor, who's got to manage and keep track of all those different pieces.
It's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
To manage, to make sure that the quality is where you want it to be, where when you set it's important to set expectations for all of those people, whether they're your own, in-staff individuals or whether they're contractors, because, you should push back on those contractors if they're not providing you with the detail that you need in inspection reports, the quality of support that you need for your RBI software, your inspection data management software, whatever that you're using. You need to be able to push back and say, no, I need someone here that's on site for this period of time because we need to train 10 of my new inspectors on how you use risk-based inspection. Mm-hmm. How do they use that on a daily basis? And even if the deliverables that you're getting, if someone's handing over something to you and they're not to your, specifications, you need to be able to push back and say, well, this is not really what I was expecting. So you have to be very comfortable with that and make sure that you're not only setting high expectations, but that you're, keeping those contractors accountable to meeting those expectations.
One of the big data points in the inspectioneering poll that we saw was that, let me see, almost 60% of people said they would like to see some better accountability out of their contractors for their job-related activities. And I think one of the big things that tells us is maybe the work isn't up to par, although quality doesn't seem to be that big of a concern from these. I think a lot of it's communication. A lot of it is setting expectations up front for exactly what you want to see when it comes out of it. Yeah. And then I'd say one of the symptoms of the current business model in the inspection world and in some of just the contractor world is that, if I don't get it right the first time, it's not that big a deal, right? I can go out and I can redo it. getting paid by the hour. I go out and do it the second time, I make as much as I did when I went out and did it the first time. And as long as it wasn't blatantly my fault, it wasn't negligence, it wasn't just poor work, nobody's really going to have a big problem with it. So getting some accountability on that contractor side and really managing those guys a little bit differently to where, hey, ideally, I go get my corrosion guy, my inspection guy, my systems guy, and maybe my my engineering personnel. I go get them from a single source. I now have one guy to talk to. It's lots easier to communicate.
Right, instead of five different people.
Yeah.
And you have to have meetings with
Let's not
different
forget
ones of them.
let's not forget the other guys who work in the department already, right? Unit inspectors, maintenance personnel, technicians, et cetera. So if you can whittle that down and demand a little bit more, not just accountability, but competency out of your contractors. Tell your contractor, I've got needs for this much corrosion expertise coming forward. I've got needs for revamps of my systems and software. If they know that's coming, put it at the feet of your contractor to say, hey, I need this kind of expertise. If you guys will provide it to me, I'm willing to get it from you because that would make my life easier. You'd be surprised at what people will respond to do. It's as long as the numbers work out and the business works out for people, it's in everyone's best interest to try to help each other out. So accountability was one of the big points that people wanted to see. Better management of work and workers on the site, I think, goes hand in hand with having to manage all those different people running around. And probably one of the bigger points, it was actually in excess of 60% of respondents to this poll said they'd like to see more efficient execution and delivery of services. So I'd like to kind of liken that to the same expectations that are lined up out front. So we were going to mention a minute ago, we wanted to kind of shift to this, but I think one of the evolutions that we're seeing, and we've already got people looking at it as far as project work is concerned, capital projects, expansions, maybe units of the facility that weren't already implemented under RBI, baseline projects, newly built units and whatnot. People are starting to projectize this work, and they're already saying, hey, I have a finite amount of equipment out there that needs to get done. Pretty well-known scope of work, right? I know that I need to implement RBI, or maybe I just need to validate RBI. I've got some baseline inspections that need to get done. For a finite amount of equipment, everyone understands what it is. People are finding a way to go make that project just like it would be if it were an engineering project. Let's shift away from this T&M model and move to some type of an alternative way of incentivizing these people. And that can take a bunch of different forms, right? There's basically pay for the work you do instead of paying for the hours you do. Maybe there's some contractors out there that are working to a fixed price for an entire project. And I think all the different methods are really just, it's a shift to try to make efficiency, effectiveness, and quality everyone's goal instead of just the guy who's paying with the check's goal, right?
Yeah, that's true. And even, so you mentioned that, as a chief inspector, not only, so I'm used to managing multiple contractors, right? I mean, that I had, other contractors in here doing my inspections, doing my turnarounds, doing my turnaround planning. So I'm used to managing multiple sets of people. So that may not necessarily be, a big challenge, because I'm used to doing that. But now that the shift is, well, not only am I managing those contractors, but now I've got to have, additional corrosion support. Now I have to have additional, maybe different types of inspection. So maybe I'm doing more advanced NDE. So then I've got to manage those individuals, look at the reports, what kind of reports am I getting back, and how soon can they get those back to me?
Yeah.
And then, so I have to be in charge or somewhat be responsible for reviewing those reports. So I need to understand what I'm supposed to be looking for. So what does a quality inspection program look like nowadays versus what it was a long time ago? So I've got to know damage mechanisms. I've got to know RBI. I've got to know my database. So that landscape is changing. The demands on your chief inspector are changing quite drastically. And then how do you manage all that? How do you I guess effectively take care of everything that you need to? Right.
And so I think the answer to that is you probably can't. Right? It's extremely difficult. You're trying to juggle all those balls and decide which one you're willing to let drop, if you're willing to let them drop. that's one of the reasons why you need a partner in helping you do that. You need
Right.
you need a contractor who's got the same goals that you have. So now they won't all match, right? I mean, your contractor may not care if you get promoted, but you do want a contractor that cares about the budget. So if that guy's working to the same budget that you are, and he knows he's got to get X amount of work done for Y amount of cost, and if he doesn't get the work done, then he certainly isn't going to get paid for it. Then now he's a partner in your goal for budget management.
Right, so it's almost like your goals have to align.
Yeah.
So you need to be talking about not just here's the work that I have for you to do,
Or
here's what I
here's-
need back, but here's what my goal is.
Yep.
How can you help me get to my goal? Whatever
Even
that
worse, even worse. Hey, how many phone calls does our inspection department get? And it's a lot because I help with some of them. Hey, I need 3 guys and I need them for 6 months. Well, I mean, what do you want them to do?
Right.
What's the amount of work that's out there for them to do? Okay, let's think about this in an alternative mindset and say, okay, rather than having 3 guys for 6 months, what if I give you 4 guys and we do it in 3 months? What if those same 3 guys can be 2 inspectors and 1 engineer who maybe they can find a different way to do it? Maybe we can automate some data load. Maybe we can do some other things. Gets away from that chief inspector, that unit inspector, facility manager, reliability engineer, whatever. If he doesn't have to figure all of that out for himself in an effort to protect himself and protect himself from misaligned goals, if he's got a partner in things, then now he's got someone who can help him out. Now you can start to get what you need out of people work-wise, instead of them just trying to populate your facility with as many people as possible for as long a period of time as possible.
Right, because I think that's something that hasn't changed, because you're always looking for partners in whatever endeavor that you're working with. And so we happen to be talking about, mechanical integrity and inspection, and you're always looking for a partner for whatever work that you do, because you want to be able to have a reliable company that you can call and say, you know what, hey, I have this problem. Can you help me fix it? I don't know what the perfect solution is. I know I need to get this done. Mm-hmm. What are the options?
Yep.
How do I decide what I should do, and looking at all the different costs for that, and okay, so if I spend this much, but then I can get this done plus even more than that, well, let's talk about those types of options. Let's talk about what that looks like, instead of, and I think that's what the definition of being a partner is also.
Yep. And I'd say you kind of hit on it a little while ago, but as the responsibilities increase for the finite amount of personnel in these facilities, as they increase for those guys, if they don't already have it built in, they've got to go get it from somewhere. You've got compliance to manage. You've got systems to manage. You've got just general inspection knowledge and to manage, in addition to the corrosion knowledge and engineering that's out there. If you don't have it within your facility, you need to go get it. And preferably you're getting it from someone who has similar goals, things are aligned, as far as that's concerned, and then, ultimately trying to get it from as few sources as possible. Let's find that partner that you're comfortable with and work with that partner, and hopefully they've got your interests in mind, you've got theirs, and it's really easy to make those incentives match up to kind of ensure that there's some alignment there. And it's I'd say one of the bigger shifts is people recognizing that that one guy can't juggle all those balls at the same time, and so when he starts looking around for help, he realizes that there needs to be some kind of evolution in who's willing to help him out. And I'd say that's one of the bigger shifts that we've seen.
Yeah, I agree.
It's it all goes back to kind of being indicative of a shift to this program based on who's there. Who can be there every day, and then what kind of work can you just bring in as you need it, and so on. But restructuring teams, putting systems in place, understanding what kind of competency is needed within the facility, and then starting to look around and figuring out where can you get the extra value out of the pieces that are already in place, whether it be RBI, going the extra mile where that mindset takes you into other arenas, integrity operating windows, corrosion control documents that kind of start to log the history of the facility and what's going on, damage mechanism wise, and then just looking for innovative ways to make your plant run more efficiently is really kind of, it's causing this incremental shift to kind of a new model compared to what we're used to, I'd say. And I'd say you've got some experience with some mobile technology that people are starting to look into, and maybe there's some benefits of that can start to be leveraged by these departments.
Right, that help make your job easier, right?
Yeah.
So that you can get more visibility into what's going on in the field, whether that's a turnaround, run and maintain work. So whatever, because technology is a big deal too. So
Yeah.
how can I make my job easier? How can I get the data that I need to make the decisions? And yeah, mobile tablets are a way that we can achieve that.
And there's all kinds of, so reliability guys have been doing, handheld monitors for operator rounds and things like that for
Right.
years and years. I think you're going to see a shift to seeing more of that in the inspection world, and getting to where there's less paper crossing desks, there's less file cabinets and more, electronic folders, and giving people almost a real-time, view of what's going on in their facility. RBI programs, RBI programs.
That's a big deal. Like real-time information. That's a huge, I guess. It's just the more information that I can have, the moment that someone is looking at a piece of equipment, and then I know exactly what's going on with it, and then I can make a decision about, okay, that's enough. We don't need to do any more inspection. We kind of understand exactly what's happening with that piece of equipment. The more real-time data that you can get, I think the better your program will be. But then the other side of that is, so if you're getting a lot of this data, is it good data? So how do I qualify? Is it good data? Is it bad data? Now I've got all of these data points. What am I supposed to do with it? Mm-hmm. So I think you've got to understand both.
Yep. I'd say RBI gave people a window, risk-based inspection softwares gave people a window into the world of KPIs, right? Like you now had a system that you could look up, and you could do it through your CMMS system. You could do it through an IDMS, the old school stuff that wasn't doing any risk calculations, but you could still see, how compliant were you, basically almost at the click of a button or at the generation of a report, right? You could tell how many overdue TMLs you had in your facility. You could see whether you were behind on visual inspections, whatever that might be. That mindset has continued to evolve. So in addition to just wanting to know where am I at compliance or schedule wise, well, maybe I want to see of the inspections that I've issued or that I know are coming up, how many of those are getting done and at what rate are they getting done? How many am I doing on a monthly basis? That type of information starts to become important. I'd say I was at the Inspection Summit in January. They had a presentation that was about KPIs for running an RBI program. There wasn't a more full room in the entire house, and I'd say one of the biggest evolutions that have gone on is chief inspectors, reliability managers, inspection supervisors. They have to report to management using something, right?
Right.
Well, the easiest and most common language that we can use are some key performance indicators that are showing any number of different things. Might be asset health in your facility, might be aging assets and how much remaining life is left in things. It might be your compliance with inspection schedules. It could be any number of different things, but there's a drive now to where I want it in a report, I want some KPIs, I want to be able to trend.
And it's not even in a report, it's almost like I want to see something pretty in a graph.
Yeah.
Right? Because I don't have enough time to read through pages and pages of a report or go through tons of data.
Yeah, dashboards.
But exactly. So
Yeah.
I want to see a graph. I want to see a pie chart. I want to see trends in the data so I can just look at that in a couple of minutes and be able to make a business decision very quickly.
Yep.
Having all of the information, but that information needs to be accurate. So when you talk about, you can have decades of thickness data, but if the data has not been, I guess, validated, the accuracy of the data isn't very good, then your corrosion rates are going to be off, your remaining life is going to be off, and so you think that, man, I've spent all of this money, I've got all of this data, I've got decades of information, but then when you really take a closer look at it, maybe only 40% of that data is actually usable, because now everything's jumping all around, because you hear, I've got pipe out there that's growing. I hear that a lot when I'm having conversations about thickness data, and you have to have kind of a process to be able to validate all of that information. So it's not just enough to have a database with information in it. You've got to have good data.
Yep. And one of the things, and to kind of tie this back to something we were talking about a minute ago, we've got data, we've got KPIs. Sometimes it's hard to, so a lot of RBI softwares will give you a dashboard. They'll give you asset health, they'll give you other things. As soon as you start to get an appetite for key performance indicators and reports and things like that, you want more of it. Well, let's go back to the conversation we were having a minute ago about contractors and what they can provide you in order to be partners. You can get KPIs out of your contractors. You can get KPIs from inspection managers, project managers on site. They should be driven. Expectations should be set up front, kind of like we talked about with communication, to where they can use KPIs to report on their own performance. You can use those KPIs to measure their performance, trend their performance over time, see if you're getting the value out of your money out of those guys. I mean, heck, why can't, I've got a project where I've got 3 different inspectors working in my facility, right? And in theory, those guys are all producing at the same rate. I understand there's differences. One guy's got a knockout pot, one guy's got a tower to inspect. Those take different amount of time. But I still should be able to trend data for, hey, those 3 inspectors are getting this all together, getting this many inspections done per month. Individually, each guy's getting this much done per month. Number one, ideally, you don't care about individuals, but even if you get to the point that you do, you want some transparency into what those guys are providing you. Those guys can give you KPIs on it, and those KPIs you can then report to management to say, hey, I'm doing my due diligence, I'm getting these reports, these are the health of my assets, RBI provided me that. This is the health of the facility. My, IDMS is saying that, here's where I am remaining life-wise across the board. Here's my contractor performance, and your contractor's providing it to you. Why are they doing that? Because they're incentivized to do it, right? They're not just incentivized to spend a bunch of hours there. They're incentivized to say, hey, here's my numbers that I'm doing better, and maybe there's bonuses built in. Maybe there's incentives built in to say, hey, if you can get above this threshold that you guys have set in the past, you've shown me you can't get more than X inspections done per day. You get done more than that, maintaining quality. Maybe there's incentives involved in that. These are all different mindsets that people are coming to the table with, and it's the stuff like this and just getting that appetite up front for something. It just grows as it goes on, and you're seeing better performance out of the progressive programs that are getting away from the compliance mindset and onto the, hey, there's all this information. I want to go do something with it. I don't just want information for information's sake anymore.
It's being very proactive, and you're seeing, that's what's propelling the industry to kind of make some of these changes, is when you see different companies that are taking those types of approaches, and that's what's really going to be, game changers in the industry, when you see companies that are kind of putting those KPIs in place and asking those expectations out of not only their on-site teams, but the contractors that they're using.
Absolutely. So, Milea, I think we've talked about a bunch of different things here today, but I think kind of to boil it down to the key components, what we're seeing is we've seen the shift over the course of the last 10, 15 years into using things like RBI, some other components like IOWs and thing out there to maybe evolve programs to a different level than they were through past decades. But I think where we'll continue to see the shift is in a few key areas. One is in getting the most value that you possibly can out of those RBI programs, out of the data that the good, effective inspections are giving you, making good decisions in your facility based on the systems and tools that are out there. A shift from that compliance or making sure I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do mindset into, hey, let's try and do everything that we can do to run this facility as efficiently and as effectively as possible.
Right, it's that checking the box mindset, right?
Yeah, we've got to get away from that.
Get this thing done. Let me check the box. Let me make sure that's taken care of. And now you want to make sure that you're creating those systems, that everything is, overlapping, and you're using your resources efficiently, and efficient use of, your dollars and just the effort that's being put into managing all those systems. And
absolutely. So making sure that you're getting the most you can out of the systems and out of the programs you have put in place.
And your contractors.
And next point exactly is figuring out how to get good, effective people in there that are going to be able to give you the results that you want to have out of your program. And because it's so difficult, and everybody said over and over again how difficult it was in this poll data that we've got, how difficult it is to get good people, means you're going to have to go get them from somewhere. So let's start pushing an evolution of the contractor, in addition to the evolution you want in your own plant, to be able to provide you good people, make sure that those people are competent, and maybe break the mold a little bit on what you think you need, and let those guys, instead of telling them what you want, tell them what you need to have done. Let them bring that to the table to you, and then finding a new ways to incentivize those guys. And then I think finally probably is start leveraging that technology that's going to be out there, and the ways that you can get data into reports, get data into not just inspection reports, but reports to management, to your department.
For your key performance indicators.
Yeah. Start to leverage those KPIs in your facility to where, in the end, you're managing with trends, you're managing with data, you're not managing with anecdotal evidence or ad hoc information that people are just kind of gathering on the fly and by accident. So,
right, because you're always asked to, especially with changes in the economy, with the price of oil changing, it's almost on a regular basis. You've got to, what we were talking about earlier, like you've got to do more with less.
Yep.
Right, so that's another thing that you have to keep in mind. And in order to do that, you have to make sure that you're getting the most out of all of your resources, all of your programs. And then you want to make sure that, above all, no matter what you're doing with your mechanical integrity and your inspection program, you want to make sure that you're reducing your cost, you're increasing your compliance, and you're optimizing your cost for all of those systems. And I think
reducing that risk, that first
Yes.
that first bit that you had there is trying to, if you can understand it, you know how to act on it. And if you can do that cost effectively in the end, then you're going to come
it's
out
a
a winner.
win-win for everyone. And I think at the end of the day, you can be proud of the program that you're working with and that you've implemented. And I think that's the work safer, work smarter, work all of that stuff. As long as you've accomplished all of it, I think it's you can go home and sleep well at night, right?
Yeah, knock on wood, right?
I think so.
I think so. After this presentation, we're going to turn it over, and there's going to be an interactive session where you get a chance to ask some questions. We're going to answer them online, and hopefully get everybody the answers that they're looking for. If there's something that we didn't talk about you'd like to hear out of us, or if we want to discuss some of the other poll data in a bit more depth, we've got all the results here at our fingertips, and be more than happy to discuss it with you, and follow up and hopefully get everybody some additional education if you just want an insight into the crazy minds that we have here at Pinnacle. So
Thank you all for attending, and we look forward to the questions.